The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. George is here along with a terrific panel. I will introduce them. David Hubler is here.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, David. Ron Rabinovitz.
Good morning. Good morning, Ralph.
Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, everybody.
And we have a guest, Gabriel Schechter. He's a semi-regular on these airwaves. Hope to make him a regular with a Hall of Fame podcast of his own. I'm hoping you're thinking along those lines, Gabriel. One way or the other, welcome this morning. And
thank you, Ralph.
And George is here. George Case, how are you?
Hey, I'm just fine. I'm looking forward to another stimulating conversation.
Anything in baseball, we can find stimulation. Any name leads to another name, a game, an instance. In any event, I would like to ask Gabriel,
okay,
who are the top 5 potential Hall of Famers who are under 25 playing in baseball today? Can you project any of those guys? And we'll start with that as a topic.
What a great question. Given, let's assume that I don't know the exact ages of all these guys.
Yeah, let's say young guys. Yeah.
This should be for all of us.
Yeah. Oh, it will be. It will be. Who do you like? Who do you think's overrated? Who do you think has long-term, whatever it takes, long-term appeal?
Yeah.
Who's going to put the numbers up on baseball cards that we'll remember?
I think the most intriguing case is Bryce Harper. You know, as productive as he has been, his numbers aren't really that good, and you have to wonder about his regression this year. So I think a year or two ago we would all have put him on a list. But if the guy's only going to hit 220, that's a different story.
Is 220 or even under the Mendoza line a sign of our times? What with the home run, strikeout, or nothing? That kind of thought process.
Oh, it absolutely is a sign of our times. This all or nothing swing where it's become acceptable to swing for the fences with 2 strikes. The stigma of striking out has vanished. But we're starting to, I do think it's going to bend back in the other direction. We're starting to discover some more versatile players, and the guys who put the ball into play are getting more credit for it. You know, what we used to take for granted, you put the ball in play, is now, wow, this guy actually puts the ball in play. I want to mention one guy. To answer your question, here's a guy to watch, Francisco Lindor. And he is very young, the shortstop for Cleveland.
What a fielder. Unbelievable. He's right up there with Arenado at third. Some others. He's terrific. Yeah. Very good call on that one. Let's go around the room a little bit. And how about David Hubler? What's your impression of today's game and today's young stars?
Yeah, I agree with Gabe as far as the chances of Harper getting in. But let's there's still a good chance he can, because if it's one bad year, that won't really affect him too much. One of the players whom I like, of course, and I shouldn't really like him, is on the Red Sox. And I won't, because I'll jinx the team tonight, but I won't mention him. But he's playing the outfield of the Red Sox, and he's red hot, and he looks like he's a real gamer, and I think he probably has a chance at the Hall of Fame. I'm not so sure about the sluggers these days. Although Tomei got in but he had 600 something home runs. I would bet on Gleyber Torres making it. I think this guy has everything going for him. He's still very young, and he's one of the few bright lights on the Yankees lineup today. For a rookie, I mean, he does try to hit the ball the other way. He does try to get on base, and so that's a possibility. And I'm not sure who else on young guys. I haven't really thought about the Hall of Fame yet for all these guys that are just 19, 20, and 21. The Orioles have that young guy too, who is really being highly touted now that they got rid of Manny and what's his name, Jonathan Shoup. So there's another possibility. That's my take.
Well, Manny himself is...
Yeah, but he falls... I mean, what is he, 27, 28? I was thinking of at the young guys. But I agree. I agree. Definitely. I've got
one for you, and the guy has really come into his own this year, and that's Javier Baez.
Yep.
He's just 25, I see, and he's turned into a star this year. He's been their best player. So if that's a trend that continues, he'll be someone to watch for.
How about everybody from the
Astros?
Astros?
Guy, and he's not even in the big leagues yet. He's Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Got called up to AAA, and he is 19 years old. And he's got all those genes.
Yeah. How about Altuve from the Astros?
Yes.
Yeah, I think he could.
Altuve's a very good.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a lot.
If he would stay healthy, Korea is the play combination.
He is 28. He's 28.
Who are you talking about?
Really?
Who's 28?
Altuve is.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll put him in that category. Definitely.
Yeah, I gotta say.
Oh, I agree.
Much easier if we open, given that all these guys could be 35. It might be a good idea to open it up a little and just say young players in general, rather than hold it to under 25. But I didn't realize that Altuve was 28. I thought he was younger.
I didn't either. I thought he was a little...
Well, he's already had 200 hits the last 4 seasons in a row, so...
Yeah. That's a good stat to go in with. Get on the list.
Creeping up on the Hall of Fame as we speak.
Yeah.
I think Korea's a little younger, but he got hurt. And so much is dependent on, can these guys stay healthy, and can any...
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Especially pitchers. How about George Case? What's your observation?
Well, I'm going to disqualify myself, I guess, because I don't really, I'm not that up on the current game simply because I just don't like it. And, the guy's going for the home runs all the time or striking out. I mean, to me, it's ludicrous to think about the Hall of Fame for a lot of these guys because you don't know how long they're going to last. They can be a flash in the pan. They can, to me, guys that are longevity-wise, they're considered for the Hall of Fame. I mean, the minimum, at least it used to be, I don't even know what the minimum is now, is a 10-year career. before you can even be considered for the Hall of Fame. And then, you've got the Veterans Committee and you've got people on the outside looking in, and one guy that, and Gabe's on the phone, I still can't figure it out why Gil Hodges is not in the Hall of Fame.
Me either.
To me, I'm going back and I'm saying to me, you can talk about all these young guys. I understand, but you got an established superstar who had played for years and years and years. And for whatever the crazy reason is, whether it's too many Brooklyn Dodgers on the Hall of Fame or whatever it is, but there's Gil Hodges that is on the outside looking in. The poor guy has been dead now. His family is there, and it would be such an honor for them. And for me, I just can't understand it. Gabe, maybe you can put some light on it. I really don't know.
Let me. I'm going to quote someone else. Years ago, I discussed Gil Hodges with a reporter named Bill Shannon. Bill's deceased now, but he was the official scorer at both New York ballparks for years and years and years, an old AP writer. And I asked him about Hodges, and he said the dissenting view was that unlike some of the other hitters in that lineup, he could be pitched to. His low batting average relative to the others reflects that. His batting average was 20, 30, 40 points lower than Snyder and Robinson. And so he could be pitched to. And his fielding was good, but not as legendary as some people would like to think. Anyway, that was Bill Shannon's view, and he said he liked Hodges, but that was the kind of peer review from the guys who had seen him play a lot, which I did not. So.
I think I
appreciate that. Gabe, I appreciate that. I don't know the writer, but to me, they had the Veterans Committee, and you have guys that are getting in there, and guys that are in the 1900s, 1800s that are making the Hall of Fame that nobody saw play. Nobody saw play, and yet here's Gil Hodges, who was a legendary first baseman all during his career and played with one of the greatest Brooklyn Dodgers, as Ronnie will attest, teams of all time. And the guy is overlooked. So I just, for me, I don't want to get off on this tangent about the Hall of Fame, but it just bothers me when we're talking
here's a good
about
perspective
young guys who,
here's a perspective that's in Hodges' favor. Hodges, Duke Snyder, Pee Wee Reese were all on the Writers Association ballot together for 9 years. And Hodges got the most votes of the three in 7 or 8 of those 9 years. That tells you a lot.
Yes, it does.
Well, Ronnie, you might want to chime in with this, because you're an old Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and knew P and Pee Wee and Campanella and Snyder. I mean, all those guys were deserving, and they're in. And here's the anchor, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, he was the anchor,
and he's not in.
No, it bothers me too, George, very much. I don't think it's right. I think he should be in. I think he should have been in a long time ago. And I think his statistics were very good and deserving it to be in the Hall. And I don't understand it.
It's not like he was one of these mean, nasty guys who ignored the press or anything. No, he was a really nice man.
Nice guy.
Yes, and but I think a lot of the reaction is maybe sentimentality that he should be in. I would have no problem with him going into the Hall of Fame. But for some reason, and we all say we don't know what the reason is, he just hasn't been able to get in there.
I have a reason.
Yeah?
I think it was the 1950 series where they made almost a joke of how badly he was doing. They had churches in Brooklyn in particular open up and pray for the guy because he was in such a slump in the World Series. Now, you could say, should a church be praying for a mortal making more than the normal guy and a healthy young man and playing a game? But I think that slump in postseason play, and in those days postseason was only the World Series. I think that did him in originally in the voting, and I think there was some nasty stuff going on between Ted Williams and he was chairing a committee, and it was Roy Campanella who was going to vote for him and couldn't get to the meeting because he was in the final stage of his horrible existence at the end. And Ted Williams won't allow a proxy vote, or am I remembering that correctly, Gabriel?
Well, Ralph, let me just say what I recall from two things. Number one, I was around here in the area when Hodges had his slump in that World Series, and you're right, the churches were praying for him. I mean, I think it was
right.
built up in the press. I mean, that was a big deal. But on the other hand, I've also heard this story, and I can't vouch for it because I have no knowledge of it, absolutely no knowledge about Ted Williams denying Roy Campanella's proxy vote, and that there was some kind of jealousy between Gil Hodges and Ted Williams because of the managing of the Washington Ball Club and this kind of. To me, I mean, it's fodder. It's sports writers. It's people that are stirring up some kind of a problem. I have no knowledge of it. I have nothing to do with the Veterans Committee. I have no vote. All I know is that I think Ted Williams was the kind of spokesperson. He went out and lobbied to get Negro League players into the Hall of Fame. Now, why would he have a personal vendetta or whatever it was against Gil Hodges when he was up there championing the rights of the Negro Leaguers that had been overlooked by the Hall of Fame for many years?
Yeah.
Well,
different league, different position. Why would that?
You make a good case, George.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Buckle has another
Here's an excellent case.
Yeah.
I don't know, but Ted Williams was a very, very complicated human being. And if he held a grudge because he wasn't as popular as Hodges as a manager, I don't even remember who came first at this moment. I do remember the news on first from Abbott and Costello.
Gil Hodges replaced Bob Lemon. Or Bob Lemon replaced Gil Hodges. Right, and then Williams came in.
I think the fans in Washington were very missed Gil Hodges. They loved him. And,
everybody loved him. He was a great guy.
May have been something, but if you include his managerial record, him not being in, and most of the guys on this network and most of the guys that I know on Facebook who are Ronnie and Scott Russell, Jackie and Claire Hall is a big Jackie Robinson proponent.
Yep.
D'Angelo is a big Jackie Robinson. They all say without the managerial success, and that was no small feat, that he should be elected anyway. I'm on the fence on that one, but if you throw in the managerial accomplishments, as voters have been instructed to do, then there is absolutely no question, and it's a travesty that he's not in there. That's
absolutely. I feel
so,
that way too.
I agree with you guys. Based on just as a player, 100% I agree with you. I think that he should be elected anyway. And if he held a conference, as voters have been instructed to do, then Wow, that's a close one. A close one for a lot of guys. A close one for Veda Pinson. A close one for Minoso.
Minnie Minoso was another one.
Right, and Buck O'Neill not being in there.
Buck O'Neill, right, exactly.
Absolutely horrible. So
Horrible.
they've made bad decisions in the past. But Gills is the worst. Only because he's universally loved.
Right.
He's a war hero.
Yep.
He had a smile on his face, if not literally, figuratively, if you know what I mean. He and Hank Bauer didn't seem like they were smiley guys. But, they loved the game, respected the game. They should be in.
No question about it. I feel terrible he's not in. Believe me.
Yeah.
I know George does too.
Yeah, well, ask Gabe, with the Veterans Committee, and they keep changing things all the time. Now you have Golden Era and all that kind of stuff. But when is the next time that Hodges can be included on the Veterans Committee ballot? I don't even know.
I don't know. I believe the answer is 2020.
Okay.
I think it's the ancient guys next, and then they just rotate them around. So I think Hodges is 2 years away.
But that doesn't mean he's going to get in then either.
Well, no, it doesn't.
Right.
And I've had people say to me, only because my dad and Mickey were teammates, but Mickey Vernon is another one that you talk about Minoso, a 5-decade player. I mean, Mickey Vernon was a 4-decade player.
4 decades, 2 batting titles.
Right, two batting titles. One of the better first basemen in the history of American League, and yet Mickey was on the ballot of Veterans Committee a couple of years ago, came up short. And I think that the next time that possibly he could go would be the same thing you're talking about, Gabe, 2020. I don't know how. To me, the Hall of Fame has changed horses so many times. I can't keep up with what committee is what and what the criteria is. I really don't know. But again, I'm not going to talk about Hodges anymore. My limit is that he should be there. Period, and that's end of discussion.
Well, the trouble with the Old Timers Committee is that they don't. Many of them probably don't even remember seeing Hodges play. As the time
they probably
goes
don't,
by,
David. You're right.
Yeah, the Old Timers Committee become new old timers, and so when the Old Timers Committee was first set up and the players these were guys who actually either played with Hodges or were big fans or wrote about him as sports writers. But I don't know even who's on the committee now. And in 2 more years, who knows who'll be on the committee then?
Right.
You mean you've got kids today that don't even know what a typewriter does, and they can't use a dial telephone. And these are the people that are going to be on the Old Timers Committee one day. And it's just not going to work. I mean, it's like trying to pick out the best ball players of the 18th century, 19th century now.
Right. Well, that's my point. Is that I agree with David. I agree with you. I don't know how they can certainly pick players from the 1800s or 1900s. I mean, nobody living today ever saw them play. And you're based upon whatever their statistics or whoever was championing their causes and that kind of thing. I just get bothered by the whole thing with the Hall of Fame. I think the Hall of Fame used to be to recognize the greatness of players that contributed to the game and that original class in 36, 37, 38, 39. I mean, all those legendary figures. Well, now you move to the present day and say, who are the legendary figures in the future from this group? I have absolutely no idea. I just don't know. And to me, longevity and career-wise have to have something to do with it. And, you could have a guy today, he might have been, you're talking some of the current players that are doing well, but they could be either, come up with an injury or some kind of debilitating situation, and they never even make the minimum, which is the 10-year, at least it used to be, 10-year performance criteria for the Hall of Fame before you're even considered.
That's what happened to Addy Joss. That's what kept him out for 60 years until they waived that 10-year rule. Listen, George, I want to address something you said. In 2013, the Veterans Committee considered all the 19th century people in that era. And that year, for the first time, they included two bona fide historians on the committee. Tom Simon, who founded Saber's Dead Ball Era Committee, and Peter Morris, who had an incredible scholar of 19th century baseball. They were on the committee, and at the Saber meeting, after the induction ceremony, I did a 1-hour interview with them about the process of being on the committee. And they talked glowingly of how receptive the players and the executives on the committee were to their input. And that was the year that Deacon White and Hank O'Day were elected, along with Jacob Rupert. I think all very strong candidates.
Right.
And it was the presence of two actual historians on that committee that and they talk about trying to form a consensus. Just instead of trying to make a balanced case for everybody on the ballot, they honed in on two or three and tried to form a consensus around those people, and they were successful, and they got them elected. So I think that's a hopeful part of the process, George. I think they're not. The impression they gave us at that meeting was that the committee members had been conscientious and had been interested in historical perspective. So the catch is that they only did that for that one committee. They did not put Saber historians on the other two era committees. So take that with a lump of salt.
I appreciate you talking about that. I was not aware of that at all. And I had been with Saber, and certainly there are some people with Saber that are well qualified. I don't know how the Veterans Committee or whatever it is pick whoever's on the committee, but certainly
I don't either.
with of history and knowledge, I think is great. If you're looking just at raw numbers, and somebody like Ronnie said, or David said that these guys have never even seen him play and don't even know how to use a telephone properly or whatever. I mean, how are they going to measure the effectiveness of a player long time that they might never have seen? Or if you're, I've heard people say to me, "Hey, I don't know anything about the history of baseball. What did Jackie Robinson?" I mean, I've heard current major league players say, "What did Jackie Robinson do?" I mean, to me, I don't quite understand. And I don't understand it because it's a fact of life. But the fact is that these guys should know a little bit about the history of the game, and the current players know very little about the history of baseball.
That reminds me of the time that Don Mattingly said, "Who's Lou Gehrig?"
Yeah, right.
Did he really?
I heard that. I didn't want to bring that up, but I had heard that, and I wasn't sure.
It sounds apocryphal. It's hard to. You walk into.
You hope. You hope it's apocryphal.
Now, it doesn't matter now, but I sure think it is. I mean, it's not like him, not like he grew up on some Caribbean
I found
island.
out that the stealth was invisible, anything's possible.
Right. It is possible, of course. But I just think it's more likely not. But, okay. There are a lot of myths going on. But one other thing I wanted to mention, in terms of Negro Leagues, one of the difficulties with voting in a Negro League plays is that the statistics are so poor.
Right.
Among the few African-American newspapers that covered them, I mean, I had to read a lot of them in writing the book, and, there are large gaps First of all,
Right.
the games that counted were only the ones on the weekend, apparently. Then they played all during the week, and they as they barnstormed from one city to
Right.
the next, and so those stats didn't count. But they showed some of the games, and so it's very, very difficult to figure out just precisely how well these guys played.
Yeah.
So much of it is hypocrisy when it comes down to that. Why? Elaborate on something that Gabriel said about Gil Hodges' lack of being all that great in the field.
That's a little bit off. I think what Bill Shannon told me that he wasn't the greatest fielding first baseman of his era, like people suggest. That he was a good fielder, but he wasn't, not the scintillating standout guy of his generation like a Keith Hernandez was.
Okay.
Or Vic Power.
Yes.
That's all.
Okay. That's very interesting.
By the way, can I say something about hypocrisy since the word came up? And it ties in. Our listeners might not know this. In 1969, when they finally did elect Satchel Paige, when Bowie Kuhn announced the result of that ballot, he made a point of telling the press, do not confuse this and do not think that Satchel Paige has been elected to the Hall of Fame. He is simply won a vote of the best Negro Leagues player. The Hall of Fame in '69, for the first time, opened an exhibit on Negro Leagues baseball. And their plan was to put a Satchel Paige plaque in that exhibit. And an immediate hue and cry went up. Separate but equal, right? And there was an impasse over the summer until Dick Young, the head of the Writers Association at the time, launched a major campaign just heaping scorn on the Hall of Fame for their hypocrisy, and they still didn't do anything until Young said, well, we will stop voting for you, and we will open our own Hall of Fame. Then they had a meeting and decided, okay, we'll put Paige in the plaque gallery with everybody else. But their initial stance with Ford Frick as chairman of the board and all that was to have a separate exhibit for Satchel Paige and the Negro Leaguers.
Wow. And Dick Young made a difference. I can't tell you how good that makes me feel, given that Dick Young is pretty responsible for getting Tom Seaver running.
Yeah, he sure was.
And balances the deal with him. He was my favorite columnist growing up as a kid. The news came out. This guy had all the insights, all the connects. If you want to read what was going to happen, this guy was the first to get into a clubhouse, interview players after a game. He was iconic. And now that I can remember him for that as well as the Seaver thing, it really makes me feel better. Thank you for that. I'm indebted to a little baseball mind.
My favorite line about it was Jim Murray, the Los Angeles columnist, who said, well, if the Hall of Fame feels that way, why don't they just move the whole thing to Mississippi?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Gabe, I want to ask you, as somebody who really, the history of the Hall of Fame and all that, but that thing with Satchel Paige. Now, was Satchel the first, the former, Satchel, pitched in the major leagues, obviously, but was he the first of the Negro League player? In other words, when did Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell, did they then follow after Satchel was elected, and all of a sudden now the Negro Leagues. Okay, I wasn't.
Satchel. I'm sorry. It was 1971 for Satchel. I said 61, but it was 71. In 72, Gibson and Buck Leonard. 73, Monty Irvin. 74, Cool Papa Bell. Basically, in those 10 years, they picked a starting lineup. They picked the best guy from each position. And then they dropped it. And then it wasn't until the 90s they came back. And for 5 years, they went back and added a Negro Leaguer and a 19th century guy. That was in the 90s. And then the big committee in 2006.
Okay. Well, good. That clears up my thinking. I wasn't sure how all that worked because, there were guys that were overlooked for years and years and years. And I mean, finally Satchel gets in there and then, the door seems to be open for, Leonard and Josh and Cool Papa and Monty Irvin was another example. I mean, Monty Irvin was a Negro League player, great Negro League player, but he developed into a very nice, major league career.
He sure did. Yeah.
Right.
He really did. Yes. Yeah.
It's interesting to note that there's a statue outside the Hall of Fame right now of Newcomb pitching to Roy Campanella.
No, it's Johnny Padres. It's Johnny Padres, and oh gosh, I wish you could visualize this because you guys are going to crack up. It's outside. It's in a courtyard outside the atrium that connects the museum to the library, and you can walk along a corridor, and you can line yourself up behind Padres. Okay, and so Hall of Fame officials were escorting Duke Snider on a tour after this thing was put up, and they stopped him right where the angle he would have had from center field. And if you know the sculpture, Padres is in the follow through of a pitch, and one leg up in the air, and they said, "What do you think, Duke?" And Duke looked at it for a while, and he finally said, "Yep, that's Padres' ass, all right. I looked at that thing for 9 years."
That's a great story. Terrific.
That's funny. That's funny.
Hey, can I introduce something to George? My opinion on whether Mickey Vernon belongs in? He doesn't. He's one of those guys that's a really good ball player that doesn't get in. But you know what? Your dad was just as deserving as Mickey Vernon in terms of being a really good, solid ball player for a lot of years.
Yeah.
That just didn't get in. No more, no less than a guy like Mickey Vernon, a guy like, like we say, Minoso, guys that just don't get over.
Yeah. George.
But include your dad in your thinking.
Well, I appreciate that, Ralph. My dad had a couple of boats, but I've said before, he just didn't play long enough, and he had some very good numbers. And if he had played, he had to retire when he was 31. So if he had played another 5-6 years and had good production, but he was hurt. So in the case of Mickey, Mickey was a 4-decade player, and Minoso a 5-decade player. I mean, they had longevity. Right. And my dad did. So I don't begrudge my father not being in there. I think he certainly was a very good player. But there were players like Mickey Vernon and like Minoso, I think, that certainly should be considered because of their longevity to the game.
George, there's another guy who played with your dad, I believe, who historians recognize as having Hall of Fame talent, and he's an example of a guy whose career was cut short by injury, and that's Cecil Travis.
Travis, right? I agree. I haven't brought Cecil's name up, but to me, he's been overlooked by baseball completely.
Yep.
And Cecil was a tremendous player. Gave his best years to service, came back afterwards, was not productive because of the fact that his feet were frozen in Battle of the Bulge. Cecil retired in 1947, the same year as my dad. But before that, Cecil led the league in hitting and number of hits and all kinds of stuff. It was a terrific player. And Ted Williams himself said on several occasions, Cecil Travis is certainly deserving of the Hall of Fame. And yet, if you talk to people today and you mention the name Cecil Travis, they have absolutely no idea who you're even talking about.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And, I think maybe part of it is keep in mind that in those days there were 16 teams. They didn't spread out to the West Coast till later. Sports writers, and I think to a certain extent it's probably part of the reason they were overlooked is because Washington wasn't very good in those years.
Yeah,
they had some good years. They had some good years. They finished second twice during the war, but their overall image was that of a second division poor team, and that may have something to do with how these guys voted.
I think it's safe to say that the home
New York Press had a lot to do with it too. They got Reese and Rizzuto in there. I don't know if that had a big influence as much as I think it did. Gabriel, do you think the New York Press was an influence?
I'm sorry, you broke up there, Ralph. I didn't quite hear that.
There's somebody breathing very heavily into the mic, and so it blocks out some of the words.
Okay.
Well, I just want to step in here for 1 second. I think David and
that affected it.
Yeah, well, David and Ralph and Gabe and Ronnie, I mean, my personal bias is that I think that, the major areas, the New Yorks, the, Boston's, Brooklyn, all that kind of stuff, certainly had the great advantage of publicity. Washington did not. And Washington, even though they were one of the original teams in the American League, certainly didn't have the exposure nationwide that the New York area and the Boston teams and Chicago and those major metropolitan areas, Washington was almost a backwater, other than you had probably the greatest pitcher of all time, Walter Johnson.
Yeah.
But, somebody like Cecil Travis was overlooked, as David has mentioned, probably because he almost labored in obscurity with the second division Washington teams. As David said, they had 2 years, 43 and 45, that they did well, but Cecil wasn't even there. I mean, he was fighting in Europe, and there were other guys that were playing for Washington, some great players. The only one from that era that I know, well, there's two. Bucky Harris was the manager; he was elected to the Hall of Fame, and Rick Farrell, catcher. And some people have said, well, the wrong Farrell got into the Hall of Fame. His brother Wes was a heck of a lot better player than Rick. But Wes was a hothead, and Rick was a very even-tempered, mild-mannered kind of guy, and who said all the right things, did all the right things, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame.
Crazy.
The wrong Farrell.
And how many people confused Wayner, the younger Wayner, with his brother? Gabriel, do you remember that in the voting?
Big Poison and Little Poison. Lloyd seems to get maligned quite a bit because he was primarily a singles hitter. He was sort of very comparable to Matty Alou, a guy we all saw play. Right. A guy who was going to hit 300 but without a lot of pop. And so he kind of got in on the coat strings of his brother, I think.
Okay.
It was so associated because they played side by side for 14 years or something like that. So they were kind of merged in the consciousness.
I'm going to name a name, and we'll start with David Hubler and then go to Ronnie Rabinovich. Should Enos Slaughter be in?
I think he's borderline. I think he was a very good player, like your category, Ralph. Borderline.
Who are you talking about?
Enos Slaughter.
Oh, Enos Slaughter, yeah.
Ian Slaughter is well known around the Hall of Fame for being the player who campaigned the hardest for his own election.
Yeah.
For many years, he finally wore them down.
Sort of the Hillary Clinton of his era. Although she never wore enough people down, but anyway.
No, she made good headway wearing people down.
I mean, Harold Stassen is really the better example. He ran here 3 times.
Yes,
And
he won 4 times in a row, something like that. Hey guys, time is getting us. This is a terrific show. Gabriel, come back more often, please.
I'll be happy to. I like hanging out with you guys.
It's great to have you on.
Good deal. Let's put it in your book for noon on Sunday, Eastern Time, 9 Pacific. You're a Pacificer.
Yes, I am.
I just want to say to all you guys who worry about us in California, Oregon, our lifestyle out here is pretty good. They're going to get a handle on these fires. It's going to take technology. There's
every year it's the same
change.
thing.
A lot of people don't think there has, but these things aren't happening by accident.
No.
It is just as likely that a fire gets to continue at night as during the day anymore. And that is so new and that's so hard to fight that but they'll be on top of it. Knowledge breeds knowledge, and gotta stay positive. We live in it's great on the West Coast. I know what the East offers. I grew up there, and if not for pizza, 4 seasons, you guys would have an argument. But anyway, thank you for being here, Gabriel. Thank you, David Hubler.
You're welcome.
It's been fun.
Ronnie Rabinovich, thank you for your contribution.
You're welcome. I'm working on Mike Veck next Sunday.
Oh, Bill, Mike Veck. What the name Veck. What that evokes in my memory book. I cannot wait for that interview. Gabriel, come back and join us and talk to Mike Veck.
I've met Mike Veck. I'd love to talk with him again.
Beautiful.
I'll let you know, Ralph and George. I'll let you know for sure. As soon as I hear from him.
Either way, if he doesn't get here, we'll talk about him. About that.
Yeah, I believe that's going to be, Ronnie, from what I hear, it's going to be next week if he can do it. And, I will definitely be on because whether or not, Mike is on or not, I've certainly got some stories about Bill Veck I'd love to talk about.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm glad that you're going to be on because it's the George K. Show.
That's right.
Thank you.
Nice of you to come on. Thank you.
Hey, I'll be here. All
right.
I'll talk to you all later.
Casey.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Casey.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Be well, everybody.
Have a good week, guys.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Adios.